How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here, and today's video is talking about the World of Tanks revival or failure, whether these modern tanks that are coming into World of Tanks console will be taken up by PC, whether or not that they will actually work, how the matchmaker is, and all of the latest news coming out of the modern tanks on console, and whether they'll be applicable for the future of World of Tanks as a franchise. Whether it will actually save the franchise from the decline it's been experiencing on the downtrend. You know, we've seen an actual reduction in the overall active players on the game throughout the whole of its lifetimes in the last 5 years. We've been looking at around 1 million players in 2015/16, and it's now down to around about 700,000 per week. It's been seeing that downtrend kind of every single year on year, there's just been a downtrend, and we want to see whether maybe these modern tanks that are coming in will actually be a positive or a negative, and this video is going to talk about everything you need to know as a PC player and also any other player on World of Tanks about the modern tanks. I want to say, if you want to stay up to date with the latest World of Tanks console and also PC news, then make sure to subscribe to this channel and you'll be updated with everything that comes out on both. I'm kind of moving in the direction of being able to do news for both console, PC, and maybe Blitz, but probably not. We're going to be focusing on those two games and really looking at the future as to what it's actually got. So make sure you subscribe in order to stay up to date with that, and also like this video if you do actually enjoy it, and make sure you comment your suggestions and thoughts in the comment section down below so we can get a good discussion going and see what the various different versions of World of Tanks players actually think about the game, and also get some feedback. Maybe wargaming will take that into account. We don't really know as of yet. Now, the first thing I want to talk about as part of this video is what actually are these modern tanks? What will they actually be representing in the game when they come in? And the only knowledge that I know is off the Wargaming console website, which I will link down below if you want to have a look at the articles yourself after the video. Basically, what it's kind of summing up is actually that there's going to be this whole new tech tree separate from the original core game mode that you know on both World of Tanks console and World of Tanks PC. You know, you've got the combination of World War II and maybe some slightly older tanks in the game, like the M41 Walker Bulldog, used in various different wars after World War II. You know, you're thinking about some older generation tanks that came out after the initial ones. We're also thinking about tanks that are from these various era periods. So we have actually 3 eras as part of this game mode. It's separate. The matchmaker will also be separate on console, which means that you're going to be splitting the player base up and dividing the player base between the various different modes. I think that is going to be slightly difficult implementation onto PC, which already have quite a big split player base with regards to the various different modes you can play. You've got ranked battles, you've got standard battles, you've got the ability to pick maps that you don't want to see, you've got grand battles, you've got various different tournament modes as well. So I think that having that is going to be even more of a deterrent as to split the player base with this kind of modern tanks that will be coming into the game. I think that PC will probably use the test data from console as to whether they'll decide in order to use the system that's currently on console, or whether they'll actually develop into their own system. I believe that what will probably happen is they do get the idea that the matchmaking and the queue times increase quite substantially after this update will happen, which will mean that they're going to have to come up with some other ways of implementing a tier system or tech tree system into the game, which enables fast queue times and enables you to actually enjoy the game in a quick fashion. You don't want to be waiting around for 3, 4, 5 minutes just to get into one battle in the game, and I certainly hope that that isn't the case with the console version, since we do have a limited player base compared to PC. I think console on average has about 200,000 players per month, comparatively to PC, which have around 800,000 per week, which is a massive difference considering, you know, that's how many players. It's 4 times, and that's just in a week compared to our month. Now, I think Wargaming using the console version of this as a big test is probably their safest bet, because obviously what happens when you use the smallest player base is it's going to hinder the least amount of players out of the whole lot, whilst also gathering some really good data for you to use. I think that the feedback is mainly going to be based around this whole matchmaking problem that's going to be caused by splitting the player base into 4 different queues. You've got one for each era. There's 3 eras. There's going to also be one for this standard game as well, which is also split into another one. And I think, the weighting of all of those is going to be slightly different. So I think after a period of time, after a couple months, the first and second tiers of this whole new Cold War game mode that is on console and these modern tanks is going to be a lot harder to actually get players to actually play, because what will happen is as they progress through the tech trees, no one's going to want to play the old like M47 pattern, and they're going to be focusing on actually the new ones like the M1A1 Abrams and the M1A2 Abrams, and also the Russian Soviet kind of tanks of that Eastern Alliance in World of Tanks console. So I think that you're going to end up with quite a big split between all of the various game modes. There's going to be the vast majority of players playing the original game as well as the Detente era on the new game mode. So I think that's going to be a real problem when it comes to PC. Obviously, they've got a lot more game modes and a bit more of a diverse split player base comparatively to console, and I think that's the real crux of this kind of idea that Wargaming are going with on console. I think there's a few different options that they could go with, as in adding them at tier 11 to tier 13, adding various different tiers added onto the original 10 that you get in game. Whether that will happen or not, I'm not entirely sure, or whether what they'll do is just have a 2-tier system where they add in maybe the post-war era tanks just into the game. I think that if it was personally me, I'd actually just remove that post-war era thing and just add in those tanks that you've developed into the current game, and then just go with the 2 eras and then matchmake between them, where you can actually compete against each other in the different eras, because currently their model stands as each era has its own individual matchmaking and you cannot go up against any other era tank. Now I think that what would be a good choice for that is actually to combine the matchmakers into one, so you only actually split the player base into 2 rather than 3 or 4, which their current model suggests. Now, with regards to the take-up on this, I think it's going to be really important as to get the initial launch correct, whether that be on the console version on April 27th in 11 days' time, or whether that's actually in the future in a little bit of time later on. So it's really key in order to, on PC, get that launch really successful. Obviously, you have common test servers and test servers which I expect would be set up to get player feedback. Whether that feedback is actually relevant to implementing into the actual game and lots of changes actually happen, I think that is what's going to determine whether it's a failure or the game actually revives. There's obviously a lot of potential for the game's growth actually using these new modern tanks, which their audience from Armoured Warfare and also War Thunder could actually come into World of Tanks just on its own and build up that player base even more, back up to the numbers that we've seen in the past. I would like a large proportion of this video to actually be dedicated to your thoughts and what you guys are actually thinking, and I think that would be really important for you to actually take the time to comment down below and give your opinions as to whether you'd actually like to actually see this in the game as an initial concept, or whether you just literally point blank do not want it in the game, regardless of whether it's developed well or whether the actual game runs smooth with these modern tanks. Do you even want to see them in the game? Because I think that personally, in terms of my opinion, it would be good to see them in the game, just because there's no reason why they can't expand into modern times. I know that historically, World of Tanks has been focused on those World War II era, but slowly over time, they've kind of run out of tanks that they can use. And yes, you could say that there's plenty of blueprints out there where they could use older tanks, but I just don't feel like there's enough room there to just keep on growing and growing and growing, and obviously it becomes a case of you're having to make up tanks out of just what you could see from very, very sketchy blueprints from back in the day. Now, I think that using these modern tanks will also introduce players that maybe weren't interested in the older tanks and were only interested in ones that they've known about in recent times to come and play the game, get involved, and also, they're going to have to start off with those starter World War II tanks, which will fill up those lower tiers, which have been a real problem with regards to World of Tanks itself. So making sure that those actual tiers are playable in both or all versions of the game is really, really important. I think that that's something they really need to focus on if they're going to get this right on PC, and to really bring back that revival of the player base and get the game kick-started again into something where we can see some growth now, instead of just this kind of stagnation and slow decline of player base. I don't think it's the end for World of Tanks. I can't see in the near future that it's suddenly just going to disappear, but I can see the numbers just continually dwindling over time, and as the game kind of has been established for so long, it's really hard to keep player base numbers up, and modernising and bringing in new things like modern tanks can actually be a real benefit. It will keep players active. It gives players something else to do other than the fact of what they've got used to. It's going to drive some older players that maybe got a bit fed up of just playing the same thing over and over and over again to come back to the game. So you're going to see a resurgence of old players as well as an influx of new players, and hopefully that's going to be to the benefit of everyone. Obviously, when loads and loads of new players come into the game, it can't necessarily be such an amazing thing for some of the veteran players, because what happens when loads of new players come into a game is the skill level tends to drop, meaning that games tend to be shorter and stuff like that. So making sure that you have systems in place to maintain that kind of level of intellect and experience of players and increase the skill of everyone quite easily through tutorial systems and various different guides and stuff like that will be really beneficial as well. Now, there are some points to be critical of, though, if we take examples from War Thunder, where the game kind of essentially failed. It really hasn't kick-started it. It's not really that big anymore. It's kind of declined quite quickly, originally from that massive influx of people. Maybe that's because the game design was just a little bit naff when it first came out, and it just didn't really drag in and incentivize people to keep on playing the game. I know that they do have a decent player base on PC. I know that on console, the Armoured Warfare variant kind of died pretty much. It's just non-existent, and it doesn't really drive in any players, to be honest with you. I know that PC has a bigger following, but it's still not as big as World of Tanks, and I think that if they take on that bandwagon, use their development and resources to increase their modern tanks kind of playstyle and gameplay within the actual game that they have, develop some new consumables that are maybe interesting and exclusive to a certain game mode, then it would be really, really good for the game, and I think you would actually attract some people from War Thunder, from Armoured Warfare, to come over, have a go and see whether they enjoy it. And if you get that right, it could be a real positive. But I do think that you have to be wary of bringing in these at the detriment of the current player base, because those are your dedicated players. They're going to keep playing the game, and if you mess around too much, it could cause some real problems. As for the actual tanks that they're introducing on console World of Tanks, what they are actually trying to implement is two different lines, similar to that of Armoured Warfare, where you've got the Eastern Alliance and the Western Alliance. You've got various different tanks that you have within those. Currently, they've only really invested into developing the American tanks and also the Russian tanks, obviously to do with that Cold War era kind of style. You've got things like the Abrams or the Abrams, and then you've got the Russian T-72. They can develop these tech trees into much bigger. You can start incorporating British tanks into there, like the Challenger 2. You've got various different things that you can actually add into the game, and there's certainly room for development. There's plenty of different tech tree lines that you could go down. I know that the French have like the Leclerc modern tank, and there's certainly loads of different things that you could go down, and I think that that would be an interesting route, but we won't really go into that in this video, and I think I kind of want to wrap this up here, but I do want to implore you to try and leave your comments in the comment section down below, and then we'll get a good discussion going down there. I hope you guys have a really good rest of your day, and I hope to see you in the next video. If you want to check out more content, there should be some on screen right now that you can click on. They'll be relevant to modern tanks. But other than that, I hope you guys once again have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.